Azadeh, why does Iran lob 20 rockets at Israeli-occupied territory? I mean, why do they do it? What are they trying to prove?
Well, partly we have to look at it in the context of the last several weeks and months. I mean, Israel has also been striking at Iranian positions in Syria. Iran has resisted, up until now, being goaded to do much more, but is responding in kind to Israeli positions in what we should remember is occupied Syrian territory. I think, however, there was a lot of talk at the beginning in that segment about, how this conflict will unfold and Iran feeling the need to maintain its forces in Syria. I think Iran feels it's very much mission accomplished. I mean, it's secured and helped the regime of Bashar al-Assad stand up against these Saudi...
It looks like Assad has won, which is what they wanted. And then I come back to why you just lob 20 rockets at something is currently occupied by Israel. I mean, it obviously wasn't going to take the Golan Heights back for Syria. It wasn't really defeating Israel in any particular way. It was just a hostile gesture of an immature kind, wasn't it?
Well, I mean, I think the Iranian government is going to be very pragmatic about this. I think they will be very happy, feeling that they've, secured the central government of Syria against.
But that wasn't helped by missiles being lobbed. I mean, look, tonight President Rouhani said to Angela Merkel, "We don't want any new tensions." It's just a really funny way of showing that at a time when the Europeans are trying to hold the deal together, the nuclear deal, by lobbing some rockets over. It's completely incomprehensible.
Well, no, indeed, and I think Iran may indeed decide that it's, suitable, that it doesn't want to pay that cost, that political cost, and will pull out its few hundred or thousand revolutionary guards that it has in Syria and return to status quo ante. Iran's influence in Syria will be undiminished by pulling out its forces.
Do you think so? Because it feels as though they've been building an infrastructure, as indeed quite a few countries have, but involving themselves in Syria in quite a deep way. And I suppose a question there, and this will be relevant, I'm sure, to what the ambassador says, is that defensive for Iran, or is that just pure interference in a country that is in the most ghastly turmoil at the moment?
Well, I think that Iran feels itself to be ultimately in a defensive position. It has signed on to this nuclear accord. It has abided by its terms. It's seen the United States decide to violate it and come out. The stated sort of problems with Iran that I'm sure the ambassador will talk about and that President Trump has talked about is Iran's regional behavior. But if the regional behavior is the problem, then pulling out of this nuclear accord
just the last point.
Yes.
I mean, building infrastructure in Syria, can Iran really claim this is defensive, this is helping Iran? I mean, Syria is, a country away from Iran,
Evan,
isn't it?
I will tell you, I think that Iran feels like it would behave and engage differently in the region if it did not have to resort to proxies and these types of influence, if it were integrated into a kind of regional security architecture, if it wasn't trying to be economically strangulated by sanctions and was allowed to normalize its ties with the world.
Okay. Let me put some of this to Ambassador Mark Regev. Ambassador, do you recognise, I know you recognise Israel has defensive concerns. They lob rockets at you, you have to defend yourself. And you're going to say that probably 3 times in the next 3 minutes. Do you recognise Iran has defensive concerns?
That's the whole question. I think Syria is about 1,000 miles from Iranian territory. And so what are they actually doing in Syria? Well, 2 things. One, that they've propped up this very brutal and murderous regime of Mr. Assad, supporting his use of chemical weapons. And so they've got a very black record there that the whole international community should be worried about. At the same time, of course, they're trying to build up a military base to attack us from. And we take that very seriously.
Let me just put to you, because the Iranians have a lot to be paranoid about, don't they? Let's be honest. There was a hostile change of regime in 1953. The CIA have admitted they were responsible for inspiring an overthrow of a government. They were invaded by Iraq. The West didn't make a big fuss when chemical weapons were used against Iran. Saudi Arabia spends something like 4 or 5 times more on defense than Iran. You have nuclear weapons. Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons. I mean, you can see that Iran might actually, if you could just put your mind into where they are, you could see they may feel, rather as Israel does, that this is actually a rather unfriendly environment they're operating in.
Listen, without dealing with all the premises of your question, I would say the following. We've got nothing against Iran. There was a time when Israel and Iran had a very, very good relationship, not so long ago. I actually visited Iran when we used to have El Al, the Israeli national carrier, used to fly to Tehran. The trouble is the regime. You have a regime in Iran which is very ideological, headed by the aptly called supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, and they are stuck in a very extreme model of the original Islamic revolution of 1979. And unfortunately, they say, don't believe me, they say that that revolution needs to be exported. They say my country should be destroyed. They say that ghastly acts of terrorism are legitimate.
Your defence is never going to rely on whether them saying or not saying they're going to destroy you, because his words is never going to defend
Correct.
Israel. What will defend Israel is having a very strong, technically capable defence. Is it fair on the people of Syria for Israel to get dragged into that conflict and to be throwing missiles into Syria? You know, I know you'll say you're throwing them at Iranian posts in Syria, but this is a nightmare, is it not, for the people of Syria, as bad as anything you could envisage happening plausibly to the people of Israel?
Look, it's terrible. And the terrible civil war has been going on for too long. And Israel has not been a party to that civil war.
No, but you're another of the countries that's interfering in
Look,
Syria.
we have not been involved in the civil war in a military way whatsoever. But now that could change.
Well,
and I want to explain why. That if the Assad regime allows the Iranians to build inside Syria a formidable military machine to attack us, obviously we can't sit back as bystanders.
and if they say it isn't to attack you, is that tolerable?
What's it there for?
Well,
What do the Iranians say?
Sorry, is Syria not going to be allowed to invite at its own volition Iranian involvement in Syria?
I think the opposite is true. The Iranians say, Mr. Assad, you're only there because we fought and died and we paid the price, and now it's payback
And
time.
so you have the right to bomb Syria because the Syrian government has invited the Iranians in.
If Iran builds a military presence in Syria, and that is offensive and aimed against us, we have
they
the
will
right...
deny that. They'll deny that it's offensive.
They can deny it until tomorrow, but guess what?
Even whether it is or not, you're not going to let it happen, is your point.
What is interesting, and your viewers need to know, is on this issue, the Arab states and Israel are one.
I'm not here to talk for the Arab states.
No, but it's important to say this, that the whole region is concerned about Iranian aggression. And I would say to British audiences, you know, they're not used to hearing that Arabs and Israelis agree on a lot. When Arabs and Israelis agree, it's worth paying attention.
Can I ask you one other question? Is it correct that Russia has given Israel intelligence about Iranian positions in Syria?
Look, as your reporter said, Mr. Netanyahu was in Russia earlier this week. We're looking for a diplomatic solution whereby the Iranian military presence in Syria ends peacefully. That's the best outcome. That's what we'd like to see.
Mark Regev, Azadeh, sorry, can't get back to you. We're out of time. Thank you both very much.